And we're back. Today we are going to talk about your free transform and scale tools. Okay, so we're covering two tools in this. We actually may get into a few more, but really the main tool we're covering is the transform tool. So we're just looking to discuss tools that allow you to manipulate artwork that's already on the board. Shapes, art, lines, strokes, whatever. And essentially what it does is it helps you change the orientation and or the look. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to create a rectangle. If you do not know how to create a rectangle, then as previously stated in other courses that I've taught, I suggest you take the shape creation course and get familiar with that, and then you'll know how to create a rectangle as well as other shapes and a little more intricate work that you can develop using the shape tool. Okay, so we have our rectangle here, and we're going to create two rectangles. We're going to create one that's just a general rectangle and one that's set to a stroke. So we're going to make the stroke 10, and we'll leave it to, actually set it to 10, and we'll make it align to outside. Now we're going to copy these so that way we can look at them side by side. Alright, so our top two rectangles, we're just looking at how transform tools apply to our strokes. Okay, so the first tool we're going to talk about is your scale tool. And you'll notice that the scale tool can be selected by the letter S on your keyboard. Or if you're looking in your tools panel, again, normally it's on the left hand side. I choose to have mine over here. If you were to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, in the second column, 7 icons down, second column over, that means it's the 14th icon. You'll find the scale tool. Now, what the scale tool does is it allows you to select an object, and then you can double click on that object, or not on the actual object, but on the scale tool itself, and you'll get a scale tool options box. Alright, and what you do is once you double click on that, inside the scale tool options, you will have uniform, non-uniform, and an options box. So let's talk about uniform. Right now, and we're going to click on preview first, so make sure this is checked at the bottom of your window. If you were to increase the uniform property, you'll notice it scales out from the center or in, depending upon whether you're increasing the percentage or decreasing. And you'll notice that it does this evenly. It maintains your proportions. Now, if you did not want to maintain proportions, and let's say you just wanted to scale horizontally, you select non-uniform. You go to horizontal, and you can increase and or decrease your horizontal scale size. Same thing for vertical, but you have to select non-uniform. If you want it to be uniform, you just have to click back on your uniform radio button again, and then you can change the size accordingly. Now here's something else. If you notice down here where it says scale, strokes, and effects, if you were to uncheck that, you'll notice that when you scale the size of this, the stroke stays the same at 170%. So we're going to click copy just to leave that there. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this rectangle we have here is going to be behind this one. And we're going to see that if we increase the scale size on this, I'm going to go back to 100 so you can see it happen. and we click Scale, Strokes, and Effects, pay attention to the size of the actual, you know what, let's change the color so it's easier to see. Now double click back on your scale tool. Let's go to 100. And let's click Scale, Strokes, and Effects. Now this original rectangle was scaled to 170. So let's pay attention to what happens to the stroke as we go to 170 when we have this in our options box selected. Notice how it's the same exact size of the rectangle, yet the stroke is larger. That's because if we check this box, our stroke will scale with our object. If it is unchecked, it won't. You notice how it disappears and reappears? That's because with it off, it's the same exact size as the rectangle we already created. If we scale it, then our stroke is in proportion with the scaling of the actual rectangle itself. And you'll notice these other options down here. This is for when you have an object inside of your shape where you're transforming an actual object, and if you're transforming patterns, which we won't go into because this is just a beginner's understanding course of the scale tool and the transform tools. Now, you may not want to just simply change that. You may want to keep a copy of it. So our original rectangle was about the size of this rectangle we have here on the top. If we just want to copy it, but to keep our original one, we click the copy button. If we were to click OK, it's going to keep the rectangle the way it is. But if we click copy, it copies it and leaves us our original rectangle at the same time. So you have an extra instance of the rectangle on the board. So let's go back and we're going to start over again. And let's change these colors just for the sake of argument. All right. Now, for our free transform tool, you can use the letter E, and you can select that tool. And essentially what that tool does is it allows you to select an item on the board, and then you can scale just like you would any other object. You can change it freely. Again, that's the purpose of free transform. And as you're changing it, you can change it independent of your height and width, or if you hold down your shift key while doing it, you can maintain your proportions. It constrains them. Now, you can also, again, as taught in another course, you can start by holding the shift and the alt key to scale from your center. And even if you're not scaling proportionately from the center, you can actually just hold down the alt key while you're doing it, and it will still scale out from the center, just not proportionately. Okay? And if you notice, while we were doing that, if we were increasing the size, the stroke was getting bigger. If we decreased it, it gets smaller. Now, you have an option of setting this in your scale tool. You can turn Scale, Strokes, and Effects off, and you can click OK. And then you'll notice now, if you're using the free transform tool, your stroke will remain the same regardless of the size that you're using in free transform. So now you'll kind of understand why I'm teaching both of these at the same time. They kind of go hand in hand, and you need one if you're going to have the other. There's also additional features of your free transform tool, which we'll get into. But essentially, it's similar to the tools that you find underneath your scale tool option. It just allows you to do them on the fly instead of specifically selecting it. Like if we were to select our shear tool, which is under the scale tool options, you'll notice that when you click on your shape, it shears your shape from left to right, top to bottom. It just makes sure your sides are parallel, but it shifts in the direction that you specify. But it keeps those sides identical. Okay? So that's what shearing is. Think of it like a slant or something being italicized. Now, the last tool we're going to talk about is the Reshape tool. And that's the third option under your scale tool. And we're going to actually create a stroke on our board, some type of line segment. Just make sure you have a few points on it. Now, what the Reshape tool does is it tries to maintain the shape of your path according to the anchor point that you're pushing. Normally, if you were to select an individual anchor point, and let's say we're selecting this anchor point, we would move it, but that anchor point would flex only according to what the nearest anchor point is. So if we're looking at this from a right to left perspective, it would be anchor point 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if I were to move 1, it would only move so far with respect to anchor point 2, meaning anything beyond anchor point 2 is not going to move. So you know anchor point 2, 3, and 4 are not moving at all, only anchor point 1. And there are times where you may want to adjust a point, but you want the rest of your line or your path to actually shift and change with the one anchor point that you're moving. And a way to do this is to select your path and click the Reshape tool. Once you do that, you can click the anchor point you want, and you'll notice a little square highlights around your anchor point, and then you can drag that point. And if you notice, now the entire shape is shifting. So it tries to maintain the overall shape, but it just adjusts proportionately depending upon where you're pushing and pulling that anchor point. So let's make a couple of adjustments and see where we can get this to go. And you'll notice that you can select one anchor point, you can select several anchor points, and it will adjust how it morphs and warps that line accordingly. Now see, previously when we did our first adjustment, it ended up here. Now if we had two anchor points, you'll see it slightly changes overall. Even though our main anchor point is in the same area, it still adjusts differently. And then if we were to even take that, let's see if we can take this a bit further, and we were to highlight 3 of them, and let's say we shift that here, you'll notice now the overall shape has changed again. So it will just shift and try to keep it proportionate, but it's different than just, let's say, selecting an endpoint with your direct selection tool and then moving it, or even if you selected 2. See? It's still different, but it tries to maintain the overall shape of your line segment. So now you understand how to work with your scale tool, your shear tool, and your reshape tool. Also keep in mind you can use the scale tool without double clicking to get into the properties. You can actually just use it on the fly by touching the area of your object you want to change and doing it accordingly. So now you understand, and you can select different points where you want to scale your object from, and it almost acts as if it's an origin or rotation point. Just some little tricks that you can work with. So study up on it, get familiar with it, make sure you learn this, so if we come across this technique used in a more advanced course, you'll be able to refer to it. Okay, I will see you guys soon.